"Please take me. I'll do anything," she said, and the Duke replied, "Will you marry me?" The grand hall falls silent. A starving seamstress kneels in rags before a man of power, her voice trembling like the church bell tolling outside. But instead of casting her out, he offers the unthinkable. Whispers spread through candlelit corridors and carriage houses. A duke marrying a commoner? Laughter, scandal, fury. Because if he goes through with it, he risks losing everything his. Lands, his title, his name. And yet, behind locked doors, his cousin plots. With forged papers that could brand her a liar and ruin them both. In a world where a rumor can destroy a life, and a servant girl's virtue is weighed against an empire. What will matter more, his duty or their love? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Morning mist curled like delicate lace over the Warwickshire fields as Eliza Carter trudged along the dirt path, her worn shoes offering little protection against the damp earth. Her small bundle of clothing, tied with a frayed ribbon, held everything she owned in the world. The growl of her empty stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager breakfast, before the bailiffs had come to seize her family. Cottage. The massive iron gates of the Ashburn estate loomed before her, their decorative scrollwork a stark reminder of the wealth that lay beyond. Eliza paused, gathering her courage as she watched a fine carriage roll past, its occupants, barely sparing her a glance through the polished windows. The manor house itself rose like something from a fairy tale, all gleaming stone and proud turrets reaching toward the morning sky. As she made her way up the curved drive, servants hurried past with baskets and tools, their sideways glances, mixture of curiosity and dismissal. A kitchen maid actually stepped off the path to avoid coming too close, as if Eliza's poverty might be catching. The sting of their disdain brought heat to her cheeks, but she lifted her chin and pressed on. She had no choice. This was her last hope. The front steps seemed to stretch endlessly upward, each one testing her resolve. Before she could reach for the brass knocker, the heavy door swung open to reveal a stern-faced steward, his silver hair perfectly combed and his black coat spotless. "What business have you here?" he asked, his tone making it clear that someone of her station should be at the servants' entrance. "Please, sir," Eliza said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "I seek work. Any work at all." The steward's lips thinned, but something, perhaps the quiet dignity in her bearing despite her circumstances, made him pause. "Wait here," he commanded, leaving her in the massive entrance hall while he disappeared through a set of double doors. Eliza stood perfectly still, afraid to move lest she soiled the pristine marble floors beneath her feet. The hall was larger than her entire cottage had been, with ceiling frescoes depicting scenes from classical mythology and gilt-framed portraits of stern-faced nobles lining the walls. The scent of beeswax and leather polish hung in the air, speaking of wealth and careful maintenance. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the steward returned. "His Grace will see you," he announced, though his tone suggested he found this highly irregular. He led her through the double doors into what could only be the great hall. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a space grand enough to host a village fair. A group of richly dressed nobles stood near the massive fireplace, their quiet conversation dying as they turned to stare at her. At the center of the room stood a man Eliza instantly knew must be the Duke of Ashburn. Edmund Hawthorne was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 years of age, with an air of quiet authority that commanded attention without demanding it. His dark blue coat was elegantly cut but not ostentatious, and his eyes, when they met hers, held neither the contempt nor the predatory interest she'd feared to find. The weight of her desperation, of sleepless nights and endless worry, suddenly became too much. Eliza's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, her worn skirts pooling around her. "Please," she whispered, her voice catching. "Take me on. I'll do anything." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then, in a voice that was both gentle and clear enough to carry to every corner of the hall, the Duke spoke 4 words that changed everything. "Will you marry me?" Gasps erupted from the assembled nobles. Lady Worthington's fan clattered to the floor. Someone muttered, "Good God," in tones of profound shock. The room began to spin around Eliza, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was the Duke of Ashburn moving toward her with swift, purposeful strides. As she slumped sideways, Edmund reached her in time to keep her head from striking the floor. He knelt beside her, one arm supporting her shoulders, seemingly oblivious to the scandal erupting around them. While other nobles pressed forward with expressions of horror and fascination, the Duke remained steady and resolute, his attention focused solely on the unconscious woman in his arms. Eliza's eyelids fluttered open to find herself in an elegantly appointed study. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air. For a moment, she lay bewildered on a velvet chaise, trying to make sense of her surroundings. "You gave us quite a fright, Miss Carter." The Duke of Ashburn's deep voice drew her attention. He sat in a leather chair nearby, his expression concerned but gentle. "Please, take your time. There's water here if you need it." Eliza pushed herself to sitting, her cheeks burning as memory rushed back. "Your Grace, I must apologize for my unseemly behavior. I never meant to cause such a scene." "The scene was entirely of my making," Edmund replied with a wry smile. He rose and paced to the window, his shoulders tense beneath his well-tailored coat. "I suppose I owe you an explanation for my unusual proposal." The clock on the mantel ticked steadily as Edmund gathered his thoughts. "Parliament, in their infinite wisdom, has been pressuring me to marry Lady Victoria Blackwood. A strategic alliance, they call it. The lady's father holds considerable sway in the House of Lords." His jaw tightened. "She is, to put it plainly, a cruel and calculating woman who views marriage as nothing more than a path to power. I've watched her reduce servants to tears for sport." Eliza's hands twisted in her lap. "But surely there are other noble ladies, all carefully vetted by those who would control my vote through marriage." Edmund turned back to face her. "By marrying a commoner, I can thwart their schemes while protecting both of us. You need a home and safety. I need freedom from their machinations." "Me?" Eliza's voice quavered. "But I'm nobody. A seamstress's daughter with nothing to my name." Edmund's expression softened. "You're someone who had the courage to walk miles, seeking honest work rather than turning to less honorable means of survival. That speaks to your character." He paused. "I promise you'll be safe here, well cared for. I ask only that you help me maintain this shield against their political games." Eliza stared at her worn shoes, mind whirling. The ghost of her empty cottage haunted her thoughts. The bare shelves, the cold hearth, the echoing rooms that had once held such warmth. What choice did she truly have? "I accept, Your Grace." "Edmund," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you must use my given name." News traveled swiftly through the manor's corridors. In the kitchen, cook clucked her tongue over her bread dough. "A commoner, no less, though she seems a gentle sort." "Did you see her clothes?" whispered a scullery maid. "Patched 3 times over." "Hush," warned the housekeeper, Mrs. Thimbleton. "His Grace's choices are not for us to question." By evening, Edmund had gathered the entire household staff in the grand dining hall. Candlelight gleamed off the polished wood panels as he stood at the head of the long table, Eliza trembling slightly at his side. "I have an announcement," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner. "Miss Carter has agreed to become my wife." She will be your future mistress, and I expect her to be treated with all the respect due to the future Duchess of Ashbourne." Heavy silence fell. Then old Thomas, the head gardener who had served 3 generations of Hawthorns, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Welcome, miss. May you bring joy to this house." Others followed his lead. The cook curtsied, the stable. Master bowed. The maids dipped in respect. Yet Eliza couldn't miss the doubtful glances exchanged between some of the younger servants, or the way the butler's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Edmund's hand found hers, warm and steady. In that moment, Eliza realized that while she had gained security, she had also stepped into a world where every eye would watch her, judge her, wait for her to fail. She lifted her chin, determined to prove worthy of the faith this noble man had placed in her. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of Eliza's new chamber, casting golden patterns across a bed far grander than any she had ever slept in. The room was modest by noble standards, but to her it felt like stepping into a fairy tale. Pale blue silk curtains framed the windows, and a small writing desk occupied one corner beneath a lovely landscape painting. "Will these quarters be suitable, miss?" asked Martha, one of 2 maids assigned to her. The young woman stood with her hands clasped, awaiting instruction. Eliza twisted her fingers in her simple brown skirt. "Oh yes, it's far too fine for me." The thought of having servants made her stomach flutter uneasily. Just yesterday, she had been desperate for any work, even as a scullery maid. Now she had 2 maids of her own. "Shall we help you dress for the day, miss?" The other maid, Sarah, was already laying out a morning dress that had appeared mysteriously in the wardrobe. I can manage on my own," Eliza said softly. "I've always dressed myself." The maids exchanged worried glances. "His Grace insisted we attend you properly, miss," Martha explained gently. "It wouldn't be right, leaving you to manage alone." Eliza's cheeks flushed. Of course, she would be a duchess soon. She had to learn these customs, no matter how strange they felt. "Very well," she whispered, letting them help her into the dove-gray dress. Later that morning, seeking fresh air and solitude, Eliza wandered into the manor's extensive gardens. The late summer roses were in full bloom, their sweet perfume filling the air. She paused to admire a particularly lovely white blossom, remembering how her mother had once grown similar roses in their tiny cottage garden. Voices drifted from around the tall hedge, male voices speaking in cultured tones. Eliza started to step away, but a snippet of conversation froze her in place. "Hawthorne's lost his mind," one man said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Marrying a commoner? It's an insult to his station." "Indeed," replied another. "We cannot allow such an affront to stand. If he goes through with this farce, we'll petition the crown directly. His lands can be stripped for such an egregious breach of propriety." Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She pressed herself against the hedge, heart pounding. The men's footsteps and voices faded as they moved away, but their words echoed in her mind. Edmund could lose everything: his lands, his position, his very legacy, all because of her. The rest of the day passed in a blur of worry. During supper, seated across from Edmund in the private dining room, Eliza could barely touch her food. The duck and vegetables grew cold on her plate as she pushed them around listlessly. "You seem troubled," Edmund observed, his dark eyes studying her with concern. "Has something upset you?" Eliza looked up, meeting his steady gaze. The kindness there made her heart ache. How could she tell him what she'd heard? What if speaking of it somehow made it more real? It's nothing, Your Grace. Simply adjusting to all the changes." "Edmund," he corrected gently. "Please, if we are to be married, you must use my given name." She nodded, forcing a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Edmund," she whispered. the name feeling foreign on her tongue. That night, in her new chamber, Eliza knelt beside the grand bed. The beeswax candle on her bedside table cast flickering shadows as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, clasping her hands together, "give me strength to do what's right. I cannot be the cause of his ruin." The candle flame danced, throwing her shadow large against the wall. In the quiet darkness, her tears fell faster as she struggled with the weight of her decision. Everything she'd ever wanted, safety, security, even the possibility of love, now seemed to threaten the very man who had offered her salvation. The morning dew still clung to the grass when Edmund's polished carriage pulled up to the manor's front steps. Eliza descended carefully, her new morning dress catching slightly on the carriage door. Edmund stepped forward quickly, offering his hand to steady her. "I thought you might like to see the villages under Ashbourne's protection," he said, his voice gentle. "These are the people who will soon look to you as their duchess." The words sent a flutter through Eliza's stomach. She settled onto the plush seat across from Edmund as the carriage began to move, watching his expression. His eyes were fixed on the passing landscape, but there was warmth in them she hadn't noticed before. "The harvest was good this year," he explained, gesturing to the golden fields. "But winter always brings its challenges." The carriage wheels clattered over the cobblestones as they entered the first village. Thatched cottages lined the narrow street, smoke curling from their chimneys into the crisp autumn air. Children stopped their play to wave at the Duke's carriage. Edmund nodded to each person they passed, knowing many by name. "Thomas's father tends the mill," he said, pointing to a weathered building by the stream. "Mary's family has kept the village bakery for 3 generations." Suddenly, a woman ran out into the road, her apron fluttering. "Your Grace," she called, voice trembling. "Please, my boy is sick with fever. The doctor won't come until next week's rounds." Edmund signaled the driver to stop. Before he could speak, Eliza was already stepping down from the carriage. "Take me to him," she said firmly. The woman led them to a small cottage where a boy of perhaps 8 years lay on a narrow bed, his face flushed with fever. Eliza knelt beside him, touching his forehead with a gentle hand. "What's your name, dear one?" "Thomas," the boy whispered, his voice rough. Without hesitation, Eliza tore the sleeve of her new dress, dipping the fine cloth in cool water from a nearby basin. "This will help bring down the fever," she explained, placing the compress on Thomas's forehead. From her pocket, she pulled a small packet of dried herbs, remnants of her mother's healing teachings that she always carried. Edmund watched from the doorway as Eliza worked, speaking softly to both mother and child. She steeped the herbs in hot water, helping Thomas sip the bitter tea. Her movements were sure and practiced, her focus complete. The fever should break. By morning, Eliza told the worried mother, "Keep him cool and make sure he drinks plenty of water. I'll send more herbs from the manor's garden." Back in the carriage, Edmund was quiet for a long moment. "You ruined your new dress," he finally said, but there was no reproach in his voice. "It's only a sleeve," Eliza replied. "The boy's life matters more than any piece of cloth." That evening, Edmund arranged for them to dine privately in a small parlor rather than the formal dining hall. Candles cast a warm glow over the intimate setting, and servants had been dismissed after serving the first course. "I've known nobles who wouldn't stop their carriages for a dying man, let alone tend to a sick child themselves," Edmund said, watching Eliza over the rim of his wine glass. "You showed great courage today." Eliza looked down at her plate, feeling her cheeks warm. "It wasn't courage, Your Grace. My mother taught me healing arts. It would have been wrong not to help." "Edmund," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, please use my given name when we're alone." He set down his glass, his expression serious. "And it was courage. You didn't hesitate to help. despite your new position. You didn't worry about appearances or protocol. That's rare in our world. Later, as Eliza prepared for bed in her chamber, she found herself touching the torn sleeve of her dress, now carefully folded over a chair. The day had changed something between them, though she couldn't quite name what. Where fear and uncertainty had churned in her heart since accepting his proposal, now she felt a warm spark of something else. Something that made her smile as she slipped beneath the covers. The memory of Edmund's admiring words following her into dreams. The grand ballroom of Ashburn Manor blazed with the light of 100 beeswax candles. Their warm glow caught the crystal droplets of the chandeliers, casting rainbow sparkles across marble floors polished to mirror brightness. The air hummed with the rustle of silk gowns, the murmur of voices, and the gentle strains of violins being tuned in the musicians' gallery. Eliza stood at the top of the sweeping staircase, her heart pounding beneath the bodice of her hastily altered gown. The pale blue silk had belonged to Edmund's late mother, and though the household seamstresses had worked day and night to fit it to her smaller frame, she felt painfully aware of every imperfect seam. "Remember," Edmund whispered beside her, his steady presence calming her trembling hands, "you have nothing to prove to them. You are to be my Duchess." The major domo struck his staff against the floor 3 times, and the ballroom fell silent. His Grace, the Duke of Ashburn, and his betrothed, Miss Eliza Carter. As they descended the stairs together, Eliza felt the weight of every stare. Ladies wielded their fans like shields, whispering behind them with sharp glances and cruel smiles. The gentlemen were no better, their scrutiny making her cheeks burn. "Did you hear?" One voice carried clearly across the hushed room. "Found her begging at his door." "How desperate he must be," another answered, "to stoop so low." Edmund's hand tightened on hers as they reached the bottom of the stairs. He led her through the parting crowd toward the center of the ballroom, his head held high. Eliza tried to mirror his dignity, though her legs felt weak beneath her. Lady Honoria Wexford appeared before them, resplendent in crimson silk and dripping with diamonds. "Your Grace," she curtsied deeply, then turned to Eliza with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And Miss Carter, how charming to see you so elevated." "Lady Wexford," Edmund acknowledged coolly. "I trust you'll make my betrothed welcome. But of course." Honoria stepped closer, her wine glass tilting. "Oh!" she exclaimed as dark red liquid splashed across the front of Eliza's gown. "How dreadfully clumsy of me." Gasps and poorly hidden laughter rippled through the crowd. Eliza stood frozen, the wine seeping into the precious silk, spreading like a bloodstain across her chest. "Enough!" Edmund's voice cut through the tittering like a blade. He stepped forward, placing himself between Eliza and Honoria. "My lords and ladies, I had planned to make this announcement later, but now seems an appropriate moment." The ballroom fell silent once more as he turned to face the assembled nobility, his hand finding Eliza's and holding it firmly. "In Miss Carter, I have found something rare in our circles, true nobility of spirit. She may not have been born to title, but she possesses more genuine grace than many who were. I have chosen her as my bride, not from desperation, but from desire. Anyone who cannot show her the respect due to their future duchess is welcome to leave my house now." No one moved. Even Lady Honoria stepped back, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Edmund turned to the musicians. "The first set, if you please." As the opening notes of a minuet filled the air, he drew Eliza into his arms. "Don't look down," he murmured. "Look at me." Eliza raised her eyes to his, finding strength in his steady gaze. The wine stain was cooling against her skin, but she forced herself to stand tall as Edmund guided her through the steps of the dance. His hand was warm at her waist, his movements sure and protective as they turned about the floor. The other couples remained along the walls, leaving them to dance alone under the glittering chandeliers. But in that moment, held close in Edmund's arms while the music played on, Eliza found she didn't care about their stares or whispers. For the first time since entering the ballroom, she felt truly steady on her feet. Morning sunlight spilled across Ashburn Manor's gardens, warming the dewy grass and casting long shadows behind the rose bushes. The sweet perfume of early summer blooms filled the air as Eliza walked beside Edmund along the gravel path, her simple muslin gown rustling softly with each step. "You held yourself with grace last night," Edmund said, his voice gentle, despite their cruelty. Eliza's cheeks colored at the memory of the ball. "Your defense of me was most kind, Your Grace." "Edmund," he corrected softly, "please ... When we are alone, I would hear my name from your lips." They paused beside the stables, where a gentle bay-mare stood saddled and waiting. Eliza's eyes widened. "Oh, I have never ... Edmund's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Every duchess must ride. Come, I shall teach you." With infinite patience, he helped her place her foot in the stirrup, his strong hand steady at her waist as she attempted to mount. On her first try, she nearly toppled backward, but Edmund caught her easily. "Fear not," he chuckled, the sound rich and genuine. "Maria is the gentlest mare in my stables. Try again." This time, Eliza managed to settle in the saddle, though her hands gripped the pommel white-knuckled. Edmund adjusted her posture with careful touches, showing her how to hold the reins properly. "There now," he said, leading the mare at a slow walk. "Feel how she moves beneath you? Let your body follow her rhythm." Gradually, Eliza's rigid posture softened. The morning air was fresh against her face, and Edmund's steady presence beside her made her feel safe. When Maria snorted and tossed her head in a butterfly, Eliza let out a small laugh of delight. "You see?" Edmund smiled up at her. "You are a natural." They spent an hour in the practice yard, Edmund teaching her the basics of horsemanship with endless patience. By the time they finished, Eliza's legs trembled from the unfamiliar exercise, but her heart felt lighter than it had in days. As afternoon settled over the manor, clouds gathered and a gentle rain began to fall. Edmund led Eliza to his private study, where a cheerful fire already crackled in the hearth. The room smelled of leather-bound books and wood smoke, comfortable despite its grandeur. "Shall we read together?" Edmund asked, selecting a well-worn Bible from his desk. "I often find comfort in scripture during troubled times." Eliza settled into a cushioned chair near the fire, watching as Edmund took the seat opposite. His deep voice filled the room as he read from the Book of Ruth, the story of another humble woman who found love across the boundaries of class and station. The rain pattered against the windows, creating a soothing melody beneath Edmund's words. Eliza found herself studying his face in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the gentle expression in his eyes as he read. This was not the cold, distant noble she had expected when she first knelt before him in desperation. "Whither thou goest, I will go," Edmund read softly, his eyes meeting hers over the pages. "And where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza's heart quickened as she recognized the truth growing between them, something far deeper than their arrangement of convenience. As evening descended, Edmund escorted her to her chamber door with perfect propriety. Yet his hand lingered on hers for just a moment as he bid her good night, and the warmth of that touch stayed with her long after he departed. Standing at her window later that night, Eliza gazed out at the moonlit fields stretching beyond the manor grounds. Stars glittered in the clearing sky, and the wet roses below her window shone like silver in the pale light. Her chamber was quiet save for the soft crackle of the banked fire and her own whispered words. Perhaps ... Perhaps he truly loves me. She touched her fingers to the cool glass, watching her breath fog the pain. The woman reflected there seemed different from the desperate girl who had begged for work mere days ago. In her eyes now shone something new, something that looked very much like hope. The morning sun streamed through the study windows, casting warm rectangles across Edmund's mahogany desk where he sorted through estate papers. The peaceful quiet shattered as the door burst open, making him start. "Cousin!" Lord William Hawthorne stormed in, his riding boots tracking mud across the carpet. His face was flushed with what appeared to be righteous indignation as he slapped a stack of papers onto the desk. "I bring grave news about your intended." Edmund's jaw tightened. "Whatever slander you bring, William, I have no interest." "This is no mere gossip," William cut in. He spread out several documents, pointing to signatures and dates. "Your precious Miss Carter worked at the Blue Swan Tavern in London, a place of notorious reputation, where women of loose virtue entertain gentlemen for coin." Edmund's fingers curled into fists beneath the desk. "These are obvious forgeries." "Parliament will not see it so," William replied, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "The evidence is quite convincing. Witness statements, employment records, even a letter in her own hand." The study door creaked open wider as a maid entered with tea, then quickly backed out, eyes wide. Edmund knew the damage was already spreading like poison through the household. By midday, the whispers had reached the village. Edmund watched from his study window as groups of townspeople gathered in clusters, heads bent together in conversation. Even his most loyal servants avoided his gaze, shuffling past with downcast eyes. When the messenger arrived from London that afternoon, Edmund's fears were confirmed. The letter bore Parliament's seal, its contents clear: dissolve the betrothal, or forfeit both influence and lands. His family's legacy, built over generations, hung by a thread. "Your Grace?" Eliza's soft voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her simple blue dress, hands clasped tightly before her. I heard the servants talking." Edmund crossed to her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Pay it no mind. These lies are destroying you," she whispered. Tears glazed her eyes, but did not fall. "Your reputation, your standing, everything you've worked to protect." "I care nothing for their opinions," Edmund insisted, but Eliza shook her head. "But I care for you," she said. Her voice broke slightly. "Your people depend on you. The villages need your protection, your leadership. I cannot be the cause of their suffering." "Eliza," she pulled her hands free, stepping back. "I release you from your offer, Your Grace." The formal address fell like a wall between them. "I will leave at first light." "I forbid it," Edmund said, his voice rough with emotion. A sad smile touched her lips. "For once, my lord, I must disobey." She curtsied deeply, then turned and fled the study before he could see her tears. That evening, alone in her chamber, Eliza packed her few belongings with shaking hands. The setting sun painted the room in shades of amber and shadow, while below her window, she could hear the continued murmur of gossip from the servants' yard. She moved to the window, pressing one hand against the cool glass while the other clutched at her heart. The estate stretched before her, peaceful in the gathering dusk. The gardens where Edmund had taught her to ride, the chapel where they had read together, the paths where they had walked and slowly learned to trust. "Better my sorrow than his." "Ruin," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. A single tear traced down her cheek, but she brushed it away. She would not let Edmund sacrifice everything he held dear, everything he was responsible for, just to save her. Love, she was learning, sometimes meant letting go. The candle on her dresser guttered in a draught, making shadows dance across the walls of what had briefly been her sanctuary. Tomorrow she would fade back into the world that had spawned her, carrying only memories of what might have been. But Edmund would endure, his position secure, his people protected. That would have to be enough. Dawn broke over Ashburn Manor, painting the chapel windows in soft amber and rose. Eliza's footsteps echoed on the stone floor as she entered, her simple gray dress a shadow among the splendor of gilt and marble. Edmund stood near the altar, his broad shoulders tense beneath his dark coat. The morning light caught the worry lines etched around his eyes. "Your Grace," Eliza said softly, dropping into a curtsy. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to stay strong. "I have come to bid you farewell." Edmund turned, his face pained. "Eliza, please," she interrupted, keeping her eyes lowered. "Let me speak while I still have courage." She pressed her hands together to stop their shaking. "I cannot allow you to sacrifice everything for my sake. Your lands, your title, your very inheritance. These must not be lost because of me. I will leave at once, but if you wish ... double quotes. She swallowed hard. "If you wish, I would stay on as your servant, perhaps as a seamstress or in the kitchens. That way, your reputation might be preserved." "No." Edmund's voice rang through the chapel with quiet force. He crossed to her in 3 swift strides, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "Look at me, Eliza." She raised her eyes reluctantly, meeting his steady gaze. The tenderness there made her heart ache. "I would rather lose every acre, every title, every scrap of privilege than lose you," he declared. "These past weeks have shown me what true nobility is, not in blood or birth, but in the heart, in compassion, in courage. In you." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks. "But your lands, your people who depend on you, will have a far better mistress in you than in some cold-hearted noble who cares nothing for their welfare," Edmund said firmly. "I have seen how you tend the sick, comfort the grieving, treat every soul with dignity. That is the leadership these lands need." "The Parliament will never accept me," Eliza whispered. "They will strip everything from you. Let them try." Edmund's arms went around her then, drawing her close in a fierce embrace. She buried her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent of sandalwood and leather. His heart beat strong and steady under her cheek. "I will stand before them all with you at my side. Let them see what real worth is, what real love can be." Edmund ... She breathed his name like a prayer. "I love you," he said simply. "Not for convenience, not for spite against their schemes, but because you have captured my heart entirely. Will you fight this battle with me, beloved?" Fresh tears fell, but Eliza smiled through them. "Yes, oh yes." Edmund drew back just enough to look into her eyes, his own bright with emotion. "Then let us pray for strength together." He led her to the altar rail, where they knelt side by side on the cushioned steps. The morning light streamed stronger now through the stained glass, bathing them in rainbow hues. Edmund's larger hand enveloped Eliza's smaller one, their fingers intertwining. "Lord," Edmund prayed aloud, his deep voice reverent, "grant us courage for the path ahead. Let our love be a light in darkness, our unity a testament to your grace, that sees not rank or station, but the truth of the heart." "Amen," Eliza whispered, squeezing his hand. They remained there in peaceful silence as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows through the chapel. The warmth of Edmund's hand in hers felt like an anchor, a promise, a future worth any price. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. The chapel bells began to toll the hour, their bronze voices rolling out across the misty morning. 8 chimes rang clear and true, like their hearts, like their love, like their shared determination to stand fast against all opposition. The Grand Hall of Parliament loomed vast and imposing, its oak-paneled walls stretching toward gilded ceilings. Morning light filtered through towering windows, casting long shadows across the assembled lords and ladies in their finest silks and velvets. Edmund Hawthorne, Duke of Ashbourne, stood tall before them, his hand resting protectively near Eliza's elbow. Eliza's simple blue gown seemed a quiet pool amid the sea of rich brocades and jewels. Her fingers twisted nervously in her skirts, but her chin remained high, drawing strength from Edmund's steady presence beside her. "My lords," Edmund's voice rang clear through the hushed chamber, "I stand before you today not merely as the Duke of Ashbourne, but as a man of honor defending the woman he loves." His words caused a ripple of whispers among the gathered nobility. "These accusations against Miss Carter are nothing but malicious fabrications," he continued, holding up the forged documents. "I have investigated every claim, traced every supposed witness. They crumble like sand when examined." His gaze swept the chamber, challenging any to dispute him. Lord Percival Hawthorne rose from his seat, a cold smile playing at his lips. "Pretty words, cousin, but they do not change the fact that this ... person is wholly unsuitable for your station. Think of your duty to the crown, to your bloodline." Edmund's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the great doors at the rear of the chamber swung wide. A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembly as common folk began filing in, farmers in clean but worn coats, servants in their best clothes, women with caps tied neatly under their chins. Among them walked Thomas, the village boy, his small hand clasped in his mother's. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded one of the older lords, rising in indignation. "These are my people," Edmund declared. "The very souls whose welfare you claim I would endanger by this marriage. Let them speak of Miss Carter's character." One by one, they stepped forward. A weather-beaten farmer described how Eliza had spent hours teaching his daughters to read. An elderly woman spoke of Eliza's skill with healing herbs, freely shared with any in need. Others told of her kindness, her humility, her tireless work among the sick and poor. Then Thomas stepped forward, his young voice clear and true. "I was sick with fever," he said simply. "The fine doctors wouldn't come to common folk like us, but Miss Eliza came. She stayed all night, putting cool cloths on my head and teaching my mama how to care for me. She saved my life." Eliza's eyes filled with tears as more villagers added their voices, each tale building upon the last. The chamber grew quiet, the earlier sneers fading as even the most prejudiced lords found themselves moved by such genuine devotion. "This is the woman you would condemn," Edmund said into the silence. "Not for any true fault, but for the accident of her birth. I ask you, which shows more nobility? Her selfless care for others, or the cruelty of those who would destroy her with lies?" The king, who had listened in silence throughout, slowly rose from his throne. The entire chamber held its breath as he descended the dais, his rich robes rustling against the marble steps. He stopped before Eliza, studying her face intently. "Young woman," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room, "I see more true nobility in your actions than in many who wear coronets." He turned to face the assembly. "The marriage shall stand. Let it be known that we find no impediment to this union, and we wish the Duke of Ashbourne joy of his choice." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Eliza swayed slightly, steadied by Edmund's supporting arm. The villagers broke into smiles and quiet cheers, while Lord Percival's face darkened with thwarted rage. The king raised his hand for silence. "Furthermore, we declare these accusations false and malicious. Let any who dare repeat them answer to the crown." His stern gaze swept the assembly before softening as it returned to Eliza. "Rise, my dear. You will make a fine Duchess of Ashbourne." The morning sun bathed Warwickshire in golden light as the parish church bells pealed joyfully across the countryside. Inside the ancient stone church, beeswax candles flickered in brass holders, their warm glow touching the worn wooden pews and time-smoothed stones. The air held the sweet scent of fresh flowers gathered by village children, bright summer blooms, adorning every surface. Eliza Carter stood in a small antechamber, her hands trembling as she smoothed the simple white muslin of her wedding gown. Though not as elaborate as noble brides typically wore, the dress had been lovingly altered by her own skilled hands. Delicate embroidery gracing the hem and bodice. A crown of white roses rested upon her dark curls, and in her eyes shone a mix of wonder and quiet joy. In the church proper, Edmund Hawthorne, Duke of Ashbourne, waited before the altar in his finest. Dark blue coat, his bearing proud, yet gentle. The pews filled steadily. On one side sat the nobility in their rich silks and jewels, faces set in careful neutrality. But the other side overflowed with villagers in their Sunday best, their genuine smiles and excited whispers filling the sacred space with warmth that the organ's first notes echoed through the ancient rafters. Eliza took a deep breath and stepped forward. As she moved down the aisle, the villagers beamed and nodded encouragingly. Old Thomas the baker wiped a tear from his weathered cheek. Little Mary, the sick child Eliza had tended, scattered rose petals with enthusiastic joy. Edmund turned as Eliza approached, and his face softened with such tender love that the watching nobles shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Here was no marriage of mere convenience. The truth of their affection could not be denied. The elderly vicar smiled kindly as the couple joined hands before him. His voice rang clear through the hushed church. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The sacred words of the ceremony flowed like a gentle stream, blessed by the morning light streaming through stained glass. When Edmund spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure. I, Edmund, take thee, Eliza, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward. Eliza's response came soft but clear, her eyes never leaving Edmund's face. I, Eliza, take thee, Edmund, to be my wedded husband. The candlelight caught the single tear of joy that traced down her cheek. With rings exchanged and blessings given, they turned to face their gathered witnesses as husband and wife. The villagers burst into heartfelt applause, while the nobility offered measured acknowledgment. A celebration spilled into the manor's courtyard, where long tables groaned under the weight of a magnificent feast. Edmund had insisted that all should share equally in their joy. For the first time in living memory, peasant and noble sat side by side, passing platters of roasted meats and fresh bread. Children darted between the tables, faces sticky with honey cakes. The village fiddler struck up a lively tune, and soon the cobblestones became a dance floor where silk slippers moved alongside leather boots. As evening drew her purple cloak across the sky, Edmund took Eliza's hand and led her to the gardens. Moonlight silvered the roses and cast soft shadows beneath the ancient oaks. They walked in comfortable silence until reaching a secluded bench near the fountain. Edmund turned to his bride, his fingers gently lifting her chin. You asked me to take you, Eliza. I have done so, not as servant, but as my heart's only desire. Eliza's eyes shone in the moonlight as she answered softly, And I am yours, Edmund, forevermore. The fountain's gentle music accompanied their words as they stood together. No longer duke and commoner, but simply husband and wife, their hearts truly united at last. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.